and welcome back. I'm Karen. I'm here with Kelly, and we are answering all of your grief questions. So, we had this sort of format before where we had a series of videos talking a little bit about estate planning and what are the steps you should take after a loved one passes away. So, we're formatting this a little bit in a similar way where we're going to do 3 videos that are specifically going to talk about grief resources. And today, Kelly, I'm going to be asking you, what are some good grief books? If a person is interested in, I had a woman one time said, I DIY my own grief, and she just reads and reads and reads. And, a lot of people choose that route and find it to be a tremendous help. So, what are some books that you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for asking because this is actually, I love reading books on grief. I'm very picky about books on grief. And for those of you that haven't watched our previous video, it's actually how Karen and I met because we were co authors in a book called The Grief Experience Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection. Because I always wanted to write a grief book. And so there we did it. And we did it together. And because of our collaboration in that book, we've been able to start this channel. So that was a really good thing. But
Yeah.
I really wanted to do a grief book because when I was a teenager after my mom died, I've read like I think probably every book that the hospice social worker had. I was like, every time I went to her, I was like, do you have another one? Do you have another one? Like, I just wanted to understand what I was going through and help normalize it. And so that's what I
Mm,
think books can be really powerful for.
yeah.
I am also really picky about the books that I recommend because I will pick them apart if I don't agree with certain things. So, we're going to talk about adult books and children's books. And so, these are some of the ones that I find to be most effective and helpful. And so obviously the grief experience, what we were in, which is 25 authors. So the best part about that book is I think really anybody that's grieving can pick it up and be able to relate to at least one of the authors. And there's also 25 tools in the book as well.
Mm,
So you're not just walking away with just, people's stories. You're actually walking away with things that you can do to help your grief experience.
yeah.
And Lucy Hone is Resilient Grieving is one of my favorites. I'm not going to read these all out loud just because we'll be here for a while, but these are definitely some of my favorites. And any book by Dr. Alan Wolfeld I'm a big fan of him.
Me too.
And yeah, he's amazing. I think from our hospice world, that probably both of us probably got introduced to him there. And he's got a book on pretty much every topic you can imagine. So
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, like anything you can think of, because he does get very specific. While some books can be very broad, which is
yep,
good, he does
yep.
get very specific. And what's nice, they're small. I mean, a lot of the books are on the smaller side, which, for some people, reading can be overwhelming, can be hard to concentrate and focus and all of that. So it does allow you to get a lot of information in a relatively, kind of short little package. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And, the grieving brain is more, I think more of a science-based neuroscience, kind of understanding what's happening to your brain. But I found it really powerful. And it's definitely things I talk about with my clients a lot about having them help them understand what's happening. We put a couple on here that are more, I would say, like this book Signs and The Light Between Us and Seeking Jordan, those are all kind of looking at ways to stay connected to your deceased loved ones. So if you believe in that, believe that maybe they're still with us in some way, those may be books that you could relate to.
Yeah.
And Always a Sibling. I am using that right now with an older teen, and she's got that book like so many sticky notes in it because she's just able to connect to it. So if you are experiencing the death of a sibling, I definitely would recommend it. It's a really good book. I really liked it.
Okay.
And then some other ones I kind of tried to target ones that were specific to different topics, like the Hot Young Widows Club and Motherless Daughters, both really good books. And I really like the journal by Megan Devine, How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. It's got a lot of prompts in it. It's got like some psychoeducation in it. So I think it's a really good journal if you're interested in maybe trying out journaling, but you don't feel like you can just sit down and write. That might be a good option for you.
Mhm.
And I put centering.org on it because that is a great website that sells a ton of different grief books. So
Okay.
thought that might be a good option if you want to explore more books than what I've listed.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Karen?
Well, I was just going to say one thing that's kind of neat these days is that like everybody has a website. So like, you get introduced to an author and then usually they have more content someplace. Whether that's through like a Facebook page and there's a community there. Like books can become very interactive now. Like you can read and then there's usually more that you
Mhm.
can do to go along with that. And some of these I think are, especially current, like that Grief Brain is a very new book. Hot Young Widows, I think is, I know that there's support groups that go along with that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, yeah. So there's communities connected to some of these books as well.
Absolutely. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just make a Google document, a PDF document with these books and all of our resources that we'll be able to add to the show notes so you can look at them so you don't have to worry about writing them all down. I should have mentioned that before, but
Okay.
make sure we do that. And then I love children's grief books. You can't see behind me, but I have a bookcase full of them. And so these are some of my favorite ones. Again, I also try to find some books that were maybe more specific, especially to how a person died. Like someone I love
Mm,
died from a drug overdose. There's not a ton of books out there for kids on this topic. This is it's a fairly good one. I like it. I've used it several times, and it's been really beneficial with some of the kiddos that I work with. And I love the grief rock book. There's one page I wish I could change a little bit, but but like I said, that's what I want to do with all the books. But I really like that because we have this like it's a really good representation. I've read this with adults as well. This it feels like a rock, right? We're holding on to this. Sometimes it feels so big that we can't handle it, and sometimes it feels more manageable. And I think it's got a great representation for children and adults to help you kind of understand what grief really looks like.
yeah. Yeah. And I think we both get questions a lot of times like asking about how to help children through their
Mhm.
grief. And oftentimes I tell them through books, because that's what kids are so accustomed to is the school environment and to, learning. Which I think we both try to do is sort of educate, through our work, but kids are just like naturally ready and set up, to be learning about it. And what's kind of interesting about these books too is that while you're sitting there and sharing it with a child or even reading it to them, they're incredibly helpful for adults. Sometimes they simplify things in a way that are better even than, the bigger, more detailed and complex books that you could get for an adult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I've had some kids that I've lent out some books and they will literally sit down every single night and read that book over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're just able to connect with it and it just helps them. And so I think, even if, some of these books are even good to just have because you just never know when you might need them. And
Right.
also it helps kids educate kids about grief.
Hmm.
And then these are some other ones. The Dougie Center, which is like the National Center for Children's Grief
Mm.
Support in Portland, Oregon. They have a ton of different books. This is just one of them that I've used a lot. But if you go to their website, they have a specific bookstore link. You can go on and see all of theirs. I also included the Invisible Leash, and that is about pet loss because we know about 60% of children, their first experience with grief will be due to the death of a pet. And so the invisible leash is a really cute one. I also like the 10th good thing about Barney, which I do not have listed, but I like that one as well. And I've used that with my own family members and where we had some animals die and we made a list of 10 good things about that animal together. So there's definitely ways to be able to open up conversations with kids on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And where do you think people can get support to help understand like what's age appropriate for kids? Because I think that's also kind of confusing sometimes. How much should we be sharing or not sharing? And and the books maybe go into this, maybe they don't, but what are your personal thoughts about that?
Well, I think someone old enough to love is old enough to grieve, right? So I don't necessarily think that there's necessarily an age limit. I think that some of these books that I've listed are probably more geared towards elementary school kids. So you may not want to be using them with teens, but definitely going to the Dougie Center, reading up on some of their resources and seeing some of their books. They have them really sectioned out um, on ages as well. So that can be helpful.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, it's a really comprehensive list. As you said, you're going to have links to that for people to be able to go and explore. And, it's just a really good way. There's so many different ways to reach a person, and for those that are readers, or maybe even if they haven't, but this is, an avenue they haven't explored yet. I mean, I find anymore there's some really good material out there. So thank you, Kelly, for sharing this list with us here today.
Thanks.